Mirror Talk, Episode 25, The Voice of Shame, Transforming Tone into Tenderness. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. Today, we step into a quieter room, the one that waits after you finally said no. Following from Episode 24, after the should dissolves, after the duty loosens its grip, after you've spoken your truth, and the air grows still. That stillness can sound like peace, but for many of us it doesn't. It sounds like shame. The voice that trembles after freedom, shame, is the echo that follows freedom. It's the nervous system's tremor after the spell breaks. The faint voice that asks, did I go too far, even when you finally did what was right for you? It's the body's recoil after choosing authenticity over approval. In the episodes before this one, we dismantled the spell of should, that linguistic scaffolding of obligation that keeps so many of us compliant, exhausted, and quietly resentful. But when the should disappears, something even older often rises to replace it. It's the tone of shame, soft internal but sharp enough to bruise. The one that doesn't shout but whispers, who do you think you are? The nervous system echo of morality shame isn't just emotional, it's physiological. In polyvagal terms, it lives in the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, the state of withdrawal, collapse, and frozen self-protection. It's what the body does when connection feels unsafe, but disconnection feels unbearable. When we can't run or fight, we shrink. We go quiet. We lower our gaze. We modulate our tone so we don't sound threatening or worse, disappointing. That silence isn't emptiness, it's submission coded in survival language. The nervous system translates belonging as safety and rejection as danger. So even the possibility of disapproval can feel like a physiological threat. Shame, then, becomes the cost of staying human in a social world. It's the residue of needing to be loved in environments where love was conditional. Inherited tone, learned tremor. Most of us didn't invent our shame. We inherited it. It came wrapped in tone from our parents, teachers, faith leaders, and culture. We learned early that belonging wasn't just about behavior. It was about sound. How you spoke. How you softened your voice before asking a question. How you apologized before taking up space. How your laughter changed depending on who was listening. And so the body became fluent in modulation, a constant translator between truth and tolerance. We learned to cushion honesty with a nervous giggle, to disguise disagreement inside politeness, to hide the tremor in our voice with over-explaining or self-blame. That's the secret language of shame. It doesn't just say, I did something bad. It says, I'm something unsafe to love unless I'm careful. When tone becomes a cage, the tragedy of shame is that it rewires tenderness into tension. We start policing our own tone, editing softness out of fear it might be misunderstood. And yet, paradoxically, we also crave the very gentleness we withhold. We want to be spoken to kindly, but our inner voice learned only one dialect: punishment. If you listen closely, you'll notice it. The tone you use when you talk to yourself after a mistake. Is it the voice of a parent, a teacher, a partner, an audience? Or is it a chorus of all of them, layered into one nervous melody that no longer belongs to you? This episode isn't about eliminating shame. It's about understanding its tone, how it moves, where it hides, and what it's protecting. Because shame, at its core, is a defense mechanism in disguise. It's your body saying, please don't let me lose love again. But love, real love, doesn't survive inside that frequency. It can't. It needs warmth, not warning. It needs presence, not perfection. Shame as a nervous system language. Through the lens of NSL, nervous system language, and MLH, Mirror-Linguistic Hypothesis, we'll explore how shame speaks through tone long before words arrive. How the nervous system uses inflection, breath, and tempo as emotional punctuation. And how each pause, sigh, and stutter tells a story of past correction, containment, and care-seeking. We'll learn to recognize the somatic shape of shame, the dropped shoulders, the slowed breath, the inner collapse, and we'll decode how to shift that energy gently, not by silencing it, but by listening to it differently. The aim of this conversation isn't to banish shame, but to soften it, to translate its sharpness into information, its self-attack into self-acknowledgement. Because what shame fears most isn't exposure, it's empathy. It can't survive being understood. From survival tone to healing tone over the next hour, we'll move through the anatomy, linguistics, and psychology of shame, mapping how tone can imprison, but also how it can free. We'll practice the transformation from inner critic to compassionate narrator, and we'll end by learning to speak tenderness fluently, to use tone as a tool of regulation rather than a weapon of control. By the end of this episode, my hope is that you'll be able to hear yourself differently. Not as a voice to correct, but as one finally returning home. You'll learn that shame isn't proof of failure. It's evidence of sensitivity that never got the safety it needed. And tenderness, it isn't a weakness. It's what happens when the nervous system remembers it doesn't have to hide anymore. So take a slow breath in. Notice where your body tightens when you think of shame. The throat, the chest, the belly that tries to disappear. Because in a moment, we'll trace that tension, not to fix it, but to understand it. We'll begin where all language begins, not in the mind, but in the body that still remembers what safety felt like before it was taught to apologize for it. Let's begin. Element 1, the anatomy of shame. A nervous system perspective, shame is not a thought. It's a reflex, a full body contraction that happens before the mind ever catches up. It is the oldest, most social emotion in the nervous system's repertoire, the instinct to hide, to shrink, to fold oneself smaller to stay part of the tribe. We tend to think of shame as a moral feeling, a sign that we've done something wrong. But in biological reality, shame is a relational alarm. It's the body's way of saying, my connection feels threatened, I might be alone soon. The origins of a nervous system reflex polyvagal theory gives us a clear map for this process. When we feel safe, our ventral vagal system is active, the social engagement branch of the vagus nerve. It supports eye contact, prosody, that rhythmic tone that makes us sound alive and present, facial expressivity, and curiosity. It's the physiological signature of connection. But when we sense rejection, humiliation, or disapproval, even subtly, the body shifts state. The sympathetic branch activates first. Heart rate rises, the face flushes, and the breath shortens. This is the fight or flight response. Yet shame rarely explodes outward. Instead, it implodes. Moments later, the dorsal vagal system, the oldest, most primitive branch, takes over. It slows the heart, helps the eyes, reduces blood flow to the extremities. The body prepares not to run, but to disappear. This is the freeze or collapse response, the physiological posture of shame. The body becomes quiet, energy turns inward, and the voice, that delicate bridge between inside and outside, falters. The nervous system is saying, if I can't be accepted, at least I can be invisible. The social architecture of survival humans evolved in small groups. For thousands of years, exile wasn't just lonely, it was lethal. To be rejected was to die without warmth, food, or protection. So the body learned a strategy: maintain connection at all costs. Shame was that cost. Anthropologist Ruth Benedict once called shame the guardian of the moral order. But it's not morality that shame protects, it's belonging. It's the invisible glue that keeps groups cohesive and individuals compliant. Children learn this reflex long before they learn the language of rules or ethics. They feel shame in the nervous system before they can describe it with words. A mother's disappointed sigh, a father's silence after a failure, a teacher's raised eyebrow, a peer's laughter in the playground. Each moment teaches the same lesson. You are safest when you match the emotional tone of the group. How the body stores social pain neuroscience shows us that social pain and physical pain share overlapping circuitry. In a groundbreaking 2003 study, Eisenberger and Lieberman demonstrated that the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region that registers physical pain, is also activated during experiences of rejection or exclusion. In other words, when someone withdraws affection or criticizes you, your brain reacts as if you've been physically injured. Shame literally hurts. That pain doesn't just live in the head. It lives in the fascia, the breath, the muscles that hold posture. The hunch of shame isn't metaphorical, it's embodied memory. Each drooped shoulder and downturned gaze is the nervous system's attempt to make you smaller, to reduce the threat of visibility. When people say they feel crushed by shame, they're describing an accurate physiological compression, the diaphragm tightening, the heart rate slowing, and muscles folding inward. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously put it, but it also keeps the tone. Developmental roots. The birth of the inner critic shame begins in the relational field between child and caregiver. In early development, every interaction teaches the nervous system a simple question. Is it safe to be me? When caregivers respond to a child's emotion with curiosity, containment, and warmth, the answer becomes yes. The child's body learns that distress can coexist with connection. They internalize regulation through tone, a melody of safety. But when emotion is met with rejection, ridicule, or withdrawal, the child's body learns something else. Connection disappears when I'm real. So they split. Part of the self becomes expressive and adaptive, the performer, while another part becomes hidden, ashamed, and silent, the exile. Over time, this relational choreography becomes internalized as self-talk. The parent's scolding becomes the child's inner critic. The teacher's humiliation becomes the adult's self-correction. The peer's laughter becomes an inner vigilance that edits every sentence before it's spoken. What begins as an external regulation of behavior becomes an internal policing of being. That's the tragedy of shame. It teaches us to survive love by preemptively rejecting ourselves. The two faces of shame, adaptive and toxic. Not all shame is destructive. Adaptive shame, sometimes called healthy guilt, helps us maintain empathy and repair. It signals that we've caused harm or violated our values. It invites accountability, not annihilation. Toxic shame, however, doesn't distinguish between behavior and being. It's not I did something wrong. It's I am wrong. Toxic shame fuses identity with error. It traps us in self-surveillance, unable to separate our actions from our essence. And because the nervous system can't tell the difference between threat and disapproval, shame keeps us in a perpetual state of alarm, even when no one is watching. It's like having an internal alarm that never turns off, whispering, don't be too much. Don't relax. Don't be seen too clearly. The polyvagal pathway of shame. Let's visualize the physiological journey of shame as a continuum. 1. Trigger a perceived disconnection or evaluation. Someone frowns, interrupts, sighs, or withdraws. 2. Sympathetic activation. The body flashes with anxiety. I need to fix this fast. 3. Dorsal shutdown. Realizing the effort to reconnect has failed, the system collapses inward. If I can't repair it, I'll hide. 4. Freeze-fawn hybrid. The nervous system combines stillness with appeasement. Voice softens, eyes lower, smile returns prematurely. 5. Self-critique loop. The mind interprets the body's collapse as evidence of worthlessness. Shame becomes self-confirming. Each stage is both neurological and linguistic. The tone changes, words slow, voice thins, sentences shorten. Language becomes self-effacing. It's fine, I don't mind. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. What's truly happening is not humility, but a form of neural appeasement. The social brain's attempt to maintain safety through submission. Why shame outlasts the moment. You can leave a situation that shames you, but the body doesn't always get the memo. It stores the tone, the posture, the breath pattern. Later, even neutral interactions can reawaken that memory. A glance, a silence, a small correction, and suddenly you're back in that state of diminishment. This is why shame often feels out of proportion. You're not reacting to the present, you're resonating with the past. Van der Kolk describes this as time collapse. The nervous system cannot distinguish between a past threat and a present echo. When someone uses a tone that resembles an old wound, your body believes it's happening again. So you freeze, you fawn, you self-blame. And then you judge yourself for doing it. That secondary shame, the shame of being ashamed, is what keeps people stuck. It's the emotional equivalent of quicksand. The harder you struggle to escape it, the deeper you sink. Cultural amplifiers of shame. Modern society thrives on subtle shaming. Advertising tells us we're never enough, not thin enough, not young enough, not productive enough. Social media magnifies comparison, creating a constant mirror of inadequacy. Even wellness culture, cloaked in positivity, often weaponizes growth. If you're not happy, you're not healed. These are not just ideas, they're tones. The cadence of perfectionism, the rhythm of urgency, the tempo of constant evaluation. Each one activates the same physiological response as interpersonal shame. We internalize them until our nervous systems no longer need an external critic. We've become fluent in the language of our own unworthiness, the neurochemistry of self-compassion. But there's hope, not in suppression, but in state change. Research by Kristen Neff and Paul Gilbert, 2011-2015, found that cultivating self-compassion activates the same brain regions associated with caregiving and attachment, notably the insular, anterior cingulate, and ventral striatum. When we soften our tone toward ourselves, we literally release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and reduce cortisol, the stress hormone. In other words, tenderness is biochemistry. Speaking kindly to yourself isn't sentimentality, it's neuroregulation. The voice you use in your own head can either perpetuate dorsal collapse or invite ventral safety. That's why shame can't be argued away, it must be soothed away. You can't logic yourself out of a survival state. You can only regulate yourself into connection. Collapse to curiosity. When you notice shame arising, your first task is not to understand it, it's to meet it physically. Start with awareness. Where does my body contract? What happens to my breath? What tone do I use when I talk to myself? Then pause. Don't rush to change it. Shame is allergic to speed. It needs slowness, not analysis, but presence. And there, curiosity can return. And with curiosity comes movement, a soft exhale, a loosening of the jaw, the return of vocal tone. That's the ventral system reawakening, connection restored. When you feel safe again, language changes. The sentences you form are longer, rounder, warmer. That's your social nervous system, literally rewriting your grammar of self. Reflection prompt: ask gently. When I feel shame, whose eyes am I still imagining? Whose voice echoes inside my own? Let your answer come not from your intellect, but from your body. Notice the image, the tone, and the posture that appear. Then whisper to yourself, you don't need to hide from me anymore. Because after we map how shame feels in the body, we must learn how it sounds in the mind. In the next element, we'll step into the acoustic chamber of self-talk to decode how words, pacing, and inflection become weapons we unknowingly turn inward. We'll trace how the nervous system translates tone into meaning, and how a single phrase can either wound or regulate. This is where biology meets language, and where the journey from self-attack to self-compassion truly begins. Element 2, the linguistics of self-criticism. Language is how we build our world, but tone is how we inhabit it. When the world outside us speaks in punishment, the voice inside us learns to echo it. Self-criticism is not a personal flaw, it's a learned dialect. The nervous system attempts to control the uncontrollable by internalizing the threat. If I criticize myself first, the body thinks, then maybe no one else will. If I can anticipate the rejection, I can avoid the shock. If I can police my own words, maybe I'll still be allowed to belong. What we call self-talk is rarely self-created. It is inherited speech, fragments of the voices that raised us, taught us, shamed us, loved us inconsistently, or demanded our perfection as proof of worth. Known as a nervous system translator, the human nervous system is constantly translating language into physiology. Every word we speak, aloud or internally, carries a tone, a rhythm, a perceived intent. The body doesn't hear the grammar, it hears the energy. When you say, I'm such an idiot, your body doesn't interpret it as a metaphor. It releases cortisol, it tightens your diaphragm. It prepares for punishment because somewhere in your neural archive, that tone used to precede it. The same sentence, spoken softly, I made a mistake but I'm learning, activates an entirely different neural pattern. The parasympathetic system engages. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for problem solving and perspective, comes online. Your body interprets safety, not danger. This is nervous system language, NSL, in action. Tone before thought, physiology before philosophy. The nervous system is always listening, not to the content of your words, but to their vibration. Mirror-Linguistic Hypothesis in motion, according to the Mirror-Linguistic Hypothesis, MLH, the framework we've been building throughout Mirror Talk. Language is both reflective and generative. It mirrors the emotional state it was born from, while simultaneously reinforcing it. A phrase spoken in fear will recreate fear in the listener or in the self. A phrase spoken in grounded awareness invites regulation. So when you say to yourself, "You should have known better," you are mirroring an old power dynamic, not truth. You are speaking in the syntax of subordination. MLH reminds us that every sentence has both a semantic layer, what it means, and a somatic layer, what it does to the body. The two are inseparable. The voice, as an internalized authority, children learn tone before they learn words. An infant doesn't understand vocabulary, but it understands vibration. The rise and fall of a parent's voice, the rhythm of their footsteps, the sigh before correction. These are the first grammars of safety and danger. So when a child grows up in an environment where love and disapproval sound similar, where affection is laced with anxiety or manipulation, the nervous system fuses care and control into one signal. As adults, we then repeat the pattern internally. We try to soothe ourselves, but we do it with the same rhythm that once scolded us. The result, regulation becomes impossible. Our comfort carries the same tone as our correction. How shame becomes syntax shame changes the structure of thought. It shortens sentences, it eliminates agency. It removes curiosity and replaces it with moral absolutism. A mind in shame doesn't ask what happened. It declares I'm wrong. A nervous system under threat doesn't care about nuance. It wants control, so it compresses language, reduces options to binaries. Success, failure, good, bad, worthy, unworthy. This is linguistic constriction, the cognitive equivalent of holding your breath. The sentences become clipped, monotone, repetitive, like a record skipping at the same point of the song. I can't believe I did that. I always mess up. I never learn. It feels like self-discipline, but it's actually self-dissociation, language attempting to restore predictability by flattening possibility. Self-criticism as self-protection. There's a paradox here. Most people think self-criticism is the problem, when in truth, it's the solution the nervous system invented to avoid something worse. In a world where external correction was unpredictable or humiliating, the body learned that it's safer to preempt punishment than to risk surprise. So self-attack became a form of emotional insurance. It's the same logic that drives perfectionism. If I never fail, I'll never be abandoned. If I hurt first, I'll dull the pain of being hurt. But that internal punisher doesn't actually protect. It just rehearses danger. It keeps the system locked in vigilance, confusing familiarity with safety. The psychology of tone. A brief research map, psycholinguistics, and effective neuroscience both confirm what intuition already knows. In 2016, a study at the University of Essex showed that even when neutral words are spoken in a harsh tone, listeners' amygdalae, the brain's threat centers, activate as if actual danger were present. Tone overrides meaning. A 2018 study in social cognitive and affective neuroscience extended this to self-directed speech. When participants read self-critical statements, their neural activation mirrored patterns of social exclusion. In simple terms, your brain can't tell whether you're being criticized by someone else or by yourself. It reacts the same way. So when we talk harshly to ourselves, we're not building resilience. We're rehearsing rejection, the linguistic posture of shame. If you transcribe your inner monologue during a shame spiral, you'll notice patterns. The pronouns shift, I becomes you. You idiot, you always do this. The self splits into critic and accused. It's the brain's way of creating psychological distance from pain, but it ends up doubling it. Another pattern, conditional language. If I can just get through this. If I stop being so sensitive. If I try harder next time. Conditional speech is a linguistic survival mechanism. It implies safety is always one improvement away, but never here now. The acoustic architecture of self-compassion. The voice of compassion has an entirely different architecture. It's slower, more rhythmic, almost melodic. It mirrors the tone a secure caregiver would use to soothe a child. Kristin Neff's research into self-compassion demonstrates that tone, not content, drives emotional regulation. Participants who spoke to themselves using warm, gentle prosody, even with neutral words, experienced measurable decreases in cortisol and increases in heart rate variability, biological markers of safety. This tells us that how you speak matters far more than what you say. The nervous system recognizes prosody as proof of safety long before it registers logic. That's why affirmations often fail. If the tone of your voice still carries tension, the body perceives the affirmation as a lie. You can say, I love myself 100 times, but if the melody still trembles with disbelief, your nervous system won't believe it. Repetition versus repair. People often ask, how do I stop the inner critic? But the goal isn't to silence it. That would only create another voice saying, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. Instead, we listen to it through a different nervous system. We regulate before we reframe. In NSL, that means beginning with breath, not words. Each exhale widens the vagal window, the physiological space where new interpretations can emerge. From there, you can start to repattern language. Replace, I always mess up with, I've made this mistake before and learned from it. Replace, what's wrong with me? with what need was I trying to meet? Replace I hate that part of myself with that part is still scared. Notice how each rewrite restores curiosity and connection. The body feels included again. Repair doesn't happen through contradiction. I'm not bad. It happens through integration. I'm human and I'm learning. The phonetics of forgiveness. If you slow down enough, you'll hear the physical texture of forgiveness in your voice. It's rounder, lower, warmer. It vibrates in the chest instead of the throat. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand. It feels safe enough to be honest. This is the voice that naturally emerges when the dorsal freeze of shame thaws into ventral engagement. The same way a body reawakens after numbness, the voice reclaims its resonance after repression. Forgiveness is not an idea, it's a frequency shift. When you start speaking to yourself from that tone, even before you fully believe the words, the nervous system begins to update its data. It learns, I can be imperfect and still safe. That's the biological foundation of self-trust. The syntax of safety. The syntax of safety has certain qualities. It allows pauses. It invites and instead of but. It holds emotion without judgment. I'm hurting and I'm trying. I feel lost and I'm still worthy. I'm sorry and I'm learning. That small grammatical shift, the replacement of but, wind, integrates rather than erases. It tells the nervous system both things can be true. This mirrors the structure of a regulated relationship. A healthy connection doesn't demand perfection. It allows contradiction. Your self-talk can do the same. When language becomes a mirror, every phrase you speak inwardly is a mirror, not of your intellect, but of your nervous system's current state. If you listen closely, your self-talk will tell you exactly where you are in the polyvagal ladder. When you're ventral, connected, grounded, your words have rhythm, variation, warmth. When you're sympathetic, anxious, or defensive, your inner dialogue speeds up, repeats, demands control. When you're dorsal, collapsed, numb, your self-talk goes flat, lifeless, sometimes completely silent. So self-compassion begins not with a moral choice, but with a physiological one. You can't speak gently until your body feels safe enough to hear itself. The internal language of repair in NSL practice, we use a sequence. Listen and locate, then loosen improves language. 1. Listen, notice the tone of your inner voice, not just the words. Is it sharp, tight, flat, fast? 2. Locate, where in your body does that tone live? Throat, chest, throat. 3. Loosen breathe to that area. Stretch the sound by slowing your narration. Or, language now translate. Replace self-attack with description. Instead of I'm stupid, try I'm overwhelmed. Instead of I can't do this, try I need a pause. This sequence rewires the nervous system's relationship to speech. It teaches your body that language can be safe again, that tone can regulate instead of reprimand. When self-talk imitates the world, cultural linguistics also plays a role. Different societies encode shame into idiom. Keep your head down. Don't get too big for your boots. Who do you think you are? These phrases function as miniature social control mechanisms, linguistically enforced humility. Internalized over time, they shape the boundaries of expression. The body learns to shrink before it speaks. The voice adapts, tones down, volume down, truth down. To reclaim your own voice is to break these inherited idioms from the inside out. It's not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's reclamation of biological freedom. The cost of constant correction self-criticism consumes enormous cognitive energy. Studies in metacognition show that repetitive self-blame reduces working memory and executive function, the very capacities we need to learn from mistakes. In effect, we sabotage our own growth by punishing ourselves for needing it. The nervous system under self-attack cannot integrate new data. It loops, it protects, it predicts. That's why insight rarely lands when you're ashamed. The brain is too busy defending against its own tone. Regulation first, then reflection. The tenderness threshold. There's a moment in every healing process where the tone changes before the belief does. You don't suddenly believe you're worthy. You simply stop speaking to yourself like an enemy. That's the tenderness threshold. A shift so subtle it feels almost imaginary, until one day you notice you haven't insulted yourself in a week. Until you realize silence in your mind no longer feels empty, but calm. That's what recovery from shame sounds like. Not loud, not triumphant, but quiet, kind, consistent. Reflection prompt. Take a moment and let one of your inner sentences come to the surface. Maybe it's a habitual criticism, an echo of an old correction. Hear it fully. Then in a whisper, change its tone. Say it again, slower, softer, rounder. Notice what happens in your body. Did your shoulders drop? Did your breath deepen? Did something inside you listen instead of brace? That's the beginning of reprogramming. Not through force, but through frequency. In the next element, we'll trace where that inner critic comes from. Because self-criticism didn't begin as self, it began as sound. As the voice of a parent, a culture, a doctrine. It's not you, it's history vibrating through your nervous system. Together, we'll learn how to separate inheritance from identity. How to recognize the difference between your voice and the ones you've been carrying. Element 3, trauma echoes, the shame voice as inherited tone. There are voices we hear inside us that never actually belong to us. They live in the mouth, but not the origin. They were spoken first by someone else, and repeated so many times that the nervous system began to think they were its own thoughts. When you catch yourself whispering, you should have known better, or don't make a scene, listen closely. The phrasing, the rhythm, the breath spacing, all of it belongs to someone else's error. Your body is replaying a script it didn't write. This is what I call the trauma echo, the reverberation of relational tone through time. The sound of survival strategies disguised as self-discipline. Our voices become inherited. The human nervous system doesn't just learn behavior, it learns tone. Babies synchronize with their caregivers through vocal prosody long before they understand language. A mother hums, a father sighs, a grandparent speaks in a certain rhythm, and the child's body responds, matching breath and heartbeat to the melody of belonging. This is called biological entrainment. It's a survival mechanism, but also the beginning of linguistic inheritance. Over the years, the child learns not only what words mean, but how they're delivered. The pauses between phrases, the urgency in correction, the micro-hesitations before affection. These sonic fingerprints become embedded in the body's grammar. So when we talk to ourselves decades later, we're not inventing speech, we're imitating safety, even if that safety was mixed with fear, even if love always arrived in a tone that carried tension. The polyvagal imprint of authority polyvagal theory helps us understand why the voice of shame feels so ancient and involuntary. Every interaction with authority in childhood, parent, teacher, clergy, or even culture wires our autonomic nervous system to associate certain tones with survival. A calm, steady tone signals ventral safety. A raised, clipped tone signals sympathetic threat. An icy, detached tone signals dorsal withdrawal. When these tones repeat across development, the brain internalizes them as part of its regulatory coding. So as adults, when we use the same tone inwardly, we unconsciously reactivate those old autonomic states. The critical inner voice doesn't just mimic what was said. It replays how it was said, and therefore how it felt to be small in that moment. The shame voice isn't cognitive, it's somatic playback. Epigenetics and the memory of threat. Recent research in epigenetics shows that trauma can leave molecular marks on our DNA, not by changing the genetic code itself, but by influencing how genes are expressed. This means stress responses can be inherited. In 2015, a study at Mount Sinai Hospital found that children of Holocaust survivors carried altered methylation patterns in the EP25 gene, the same gene involved in stress regulation. Their bodies were primed for vigilance even without direct exposure to trauma. So when we talk about inherited tone, we're not only speaking metaphorically. The sensitivity to threat, the hair trigger for shame, the urge to appease, these are physiological legacies. Our nervous systems are heirlooms. What one generation endured in silence becomes the next generation's internal monologue. Family language as emotional DNA. Every family has a linguistic ecosystem, its own idioms, its own emotional grammar. Some families speak in jokes, others in warnings. Some use sarcasm as bonding, others weaponize politeness. These speech patterns encode values and survival priorities. When affection is expressed only through teasing, tenderness begins to sound suspicious. When conflict is forbidden, honesty becomes dangerous. When stoicism is praised, vulnerability feels like failure. So we grow up fluent in the dialect of our lineage, and then mistake it for the language of the world. When someone speaks differently, too softly, too directly, too kindly, our bodies don't always interpret it as kindness. They interpret it as foreign. That's why genuine compassion can feel uncomfortable at first. It's not that we don't want it, it's that our nervous systems don't yet speak its frequency. Echoes in cultural speech beyond family. Cultural conditioning adds another layer of inherited tone. Collectivist cultures often encode shame as humility. Individualist cultures encode it as guilt. Religious traditions may equate obedience with virtue. Educational systems may reward performance over authenticity. Every one of these linguistic ecosystems carries a tone that teaches how love is earned. The English-speaking world, for instance, is saturated with modesty phrases. I can't complain, not too bad, could be worse. Each one linguistically dampens emotional truth, shrinking the range of expression. This is emotional regulation through understatement, social dorsal tone disguised as politeness. Contrast that with cultures where emotional expressivity is normalized, the rhythm of speech is wider, tone more embodied, laughter more permissible. Different nervous systems, different vocabularies of safety. So when you move across cultures, you may experience shame not because of wrongdoing, but because of resonance mismatch. Your body's tone doesn't fit the room's expectation. That dissonance alone can trigger the trauma echo. The 3 generational layers of shame tone through both observation and NSL mapping. I've identified 3 generational tones that often shape the inner critic. 1. The silent tone, the unspoken generation. This is the tone of post-war parents and grandparents. Emotion was dangerous, survival meant stoicism. Their shame lived in silence, in the tightening of the jaw, the long pause before approval. When inherited, this becomes the adult who punishes themselves through quiet withdrawal. 2. The scrutinizing tone, the achievement generation. Emotion was tolerated, but performance was paramount. You can do better. Don't embarrass us. Be grateful. The rhythm is fast, clipped, and efficient. When inherited, this becomes internal urgency, the voice that equates rest with laziness. 3. The hyper-reflective tone, the therapeutic generation. Here, language becomes more self-aware, but often self-critical in disguise. I know I shouldn't feel this way. I'm working on my issues. The tone is intellectual, subtly moralizing. When inherited, this becomes analysis paralysis, using awareness as a form of self-attack. Each generation refines shame into a different linguistic art form, but beneath all of them is the same biological motive. If I monitor myself well enough, maybe I'll stay loved. Recognizing the echo in real time to recognize inherited tone, you need to listen not for content, but for texture. Here's how to track it in practice. 1. Notice abruptness. When your inner voice cuts off mid-thought, it often mirrors someone who used to interrupt you. 2. Notice repetition, the phrase you use most often. What's wrong with me? Get over it. Don't make this harder may not be yours at all. 3. Notice modulation. Does your tone soften automatically when you imagine conflict? That's appeasement tone. 4. Notice speed. Shame accelerates inner speech. Compassion slows it down. You're not analyzing yourself. You're eavesdropping on your lineage. Personal reflection. When my voice wasn't mine, there was a moment, early in writing the Inverse-Averse episodes, when I noticed something unsettling. Every time I finished recording a particularly vulnerable passage, I'd instinctively whisper, "That's too much." Not consciously, but quietly, like a nervous tic. It wasn't an intellectual thought. It was a physical contraction. When I traced the tone back, I realized it was the exact cadence of a relative sigh whenever emotion felt too heavy. They weren't cruel. They were overwhelmed. And my nervous system had mistaken their discomfort for a rule. So even decades later, as an adult speaking about emotional truth, my body still rehearsed their regulation. It wasn't self-doubt, it was inherited tone. Once I heard it clearly, I could separate it. I whispered back, "It's okay, I can handle depth." The body relaxed, the breath deepened. That was the first time I felt my own voice, not theirs in my throat. That's the work. Not replacing the old voice, but gently teaching the body it no longer needs to echo it. The mirror function of shame, every internalized tone once had an external mirror. The brain stores these echoes in the insula, the region that translates interoception, body signals, into emotional awareness. When someone used a particular tone toward you in childhood, your insula encoded the feeling of that tone. Later, when you use the same tone toward yourself, the insula reactivates the same emotional chemistry. That's why self-criticism feels viscerally interpersonal. You're not imagining someone judging you. You're reliving the bodily sensation of being judged. The inner critic is not metaphorical. It's a neurological avatar of past relationship dynamics. To heal it, you can't just change the words. You have to update the mirror. Updating the mirror NSL recalibration practice. Here's a simple NSL recalibration exercise for inherited tone. 1. Listen. Speak one of your self-critical sentences out loud, slowly. 2. Identify. Ask, whose tone does this sound like? Don't overthink it. The first image or memory that arises is usually correct. 3. Acknowledge. Whisper, "I hear you, but I'm not you." Feel the separation in your breath. 4. Replace. Now repeat the same sentence, but in your own authentic tone, slower, fuller, lower. 5. Regulate. Notice the bodily difference. Does your chest open? Does your throat loosen? Repeat this whenever the shame voice appears. Over time, your nervous system will begin to distinguish inherited tone from present safety. That's how reparenting through voice actually works, not through scripts, but through resonance. Collective inheritance. Cultural reverberations beyond families. Entire societies transmit tone through institutions. Education systems that prioritize compliance create populations fluent in self-censorship. Religious structures that moralize suffering produce internalized guilt as virtue. Political rhetoric that demands loyalty at the cost of truth shapes collective dorsal tone, citizens frozen between obedience and silent rebellion. Each system, consciously or not, uses linguistic shame as social glue, and when those systems crumble, when people begin to awaken, the first symptom isn't revolution. It's stuttering, because the body is trying to find a new tone that won't get it punished. That stutter, that tremor, that hesitation, it's not weakness. It's evolution in progress. A nervous system learning a new dialect of freedom, the compassionate turn. The goal isn't to destroy the inherited voice. It's to understand what it was protecting. The parent's criticism was often fear disguised as guidance. The teacher's harshness was anxiety in authority. The culture's moralism was a survival strategy. When you can hear the love beneath the control, even if it's distorted, shame begins to dissolve. Because compassion and shame cannot coexist in the same nervous system state. Compassion reactivates ventral engagement. It widens perception, restores curiosity, and softens tone. You can't shame yourself into healing, but you can listen yourself into freedom. Reflection prompt, sit in silence for a moment. Hear your inner voice speak one of its oldest lines. Then ask, who taught me to speak to myself this way? When the memory surfaces, don't rush to forgive or condemn. Simply breathe and say, "Thank you for teaching me survival. I'll take it from here." Let that be your nervous system's way of closing the loop, a soft farewell to the voice that once protected you by pretending to be you. We often think healing begins when the noise of the old voices fades, but the truth is, silence isn't the end of shame. It's the space where its echo can finally be heard clearly enough to be translated. When you start to notice how those inherited tones speak through you, the clipped cadence, the tightening in the jaw, the reflexive apology, you begin to realize something radical. The inner critic was never your enemy. It was your first attempt at love. It spoke in the only frequency it knew, the one that used to keep you safe. But safety isn't the same as peace. Safety is what you build when love feels conditional. Peace is what you rediscover when it stops being earned. So the next step isn't to argue with that voice. It's to learn to hold it, to bring warmth where once there was surveillance, to let compassion do what analysis never could, soften the charge of survival until it becomes the current of connection. Because every time you meet your shame with tenderness, you're not just healing your mind, you're rewriting your lineage's definition of love. And that is where the alchemy begins. Element 4, psychological insight, the alchemy of tenderness. There comes a point in every journey with shame where analysis no longer works. You can map its origins, name its triggers, trace its tone back to the family table, but the ache remains. That ache is not intellectual, it's biological. It's the residue of separation, from safety, from softness, from self. At that point, the only medicine left is tenderness. Not as sentiment, not as weakness, but as a form of alchemy, the conscious transmutation of fear into connection through the physiology of compassion. This is what I call the alchemy of tenderness, the process of turning shame's contraction into coherence, not by fighting it, but by feeling it differently. The paradox of self-improvement and the myth of goodness before tenderness can emerge. We have to dismantle one of shame's oldest disguises, the pursuit of being good. Shame often hides behind morality. It pretends to be conscience, that quiet voice that keeps us ethical and responsible. Most of what we call being good is a nervous system strategy for safety. As children, we learned that approval felt like connection. To be good meant to be loved. To disappoint meant to be abandoned. So morality and survival fused. That's why when adults try to relax their self-criticism, an inner panic arises. If I stop pushing myself, I'll become lazy. If I stop apologizing, I'll become selfish. If I forgive myself, I'll lose discipline. This is the morality trap, a false binary created by a dysregulated nervous system that equates control with safety. The nervous system doesn't understand ethics, it understands states. Safety equals good, threat equals bad. So when you try to move towards self-acceptance, your body doesn't feel virtuous, it feels unsafe. The voice of shame is not trying to ruin you, it's trying to keep you alive within an outdated map of belonging. Shame's chemical architecture. To understand why tenderness is so powerful, we need to look at what shame does to the body. When the shame reflex activates, the following sequence unfolds. 1. Amygdala alarm. The emotional brain detects threat, not physical, but social. 2. Cortisol surge. The body mobilizes energy for repair or retreat. 3. Vagal withdrawal. The ventral vagus connection system shuts down. Eye contact and vocal tone flatten. 4. Heart rate slows. Blood flow decreases to extremities. Posture collapses inward. 5. Language center inhibition. Broca's area, responsible for speech production, reduces activity, which is why we often become tongue-tied when ashamed. This cascade creates what neuroscientist Stephen Porges calls neuroception of unsafety, the unconscious physiological sense that we are not okay to exist as we are. The body collapses not out of guilt, but out of an ancient impulse to appease disconnection. It's the emotional equivalent of a child whispering, "I'll be good, just don't go." The counter-chemistry of compassion-tenderness, by contrast, activates the exact opposite neurochemical profile. When we speak kindly to ourselves, even internally, the brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It also increases activity in the insular and anterior cingulate cortex, regions associated with empathy and self-awareness. At the same time, cortisol levels drop and vagal tone increases, restoring heart rate variability, a measure of emotional flexibility. In 2011, Kristin Neff and her colleagues conducted one of the foundational studies on self-compassion. Participants were guided through compassionate self-talk exercises and then scanned for neural activity. The results showed activation in the same areas of the brain that light up during parental affection and romantic love. This means the nervous system doesn't distinguish between being comforted by someone else and being comforted by yourself, as long as the tone is genuine. In other words, tenderness is not metaphorical healing, it's neurological reprogramming, softness as strength. There's a cultural myth that tenderness is weakness, that strength means stoicism, discipline, or emotional neutrality. But in biological terms, softness is not the absence of strength, it's the restoration of flexibility. Rigid systems break under stress. Flexible systems adapt. When your voice softens, your vagal tone rises. When you allow tears, you restore circulation to the heart. When you choose warmth over aggression, your body exits hypervigilance and reopens to connection. Softness is the nervous system's way of saying, "I'm no longer preparing for exile." The parasympathetic system doesn't respond to dominance, it responds to safety. So when you speak to yourself with tenderness, you're not being indulgent, you're restoring full access to your intelligence. Saying sorry to the nervous system. One of the simplest, most profound practices to carry out in NSL is called saying sorry to your nervous system. It's not about guilt, it's about repair. Because shame is, at its core, a rupture in an internal relationship. You've been punishing your body for protecting you. Here's how it works. 1. Pause. Close your eyes. 2. Notice where in your body feels tivy or braced. 3. Whisper, "I'm sorry for making you carry so much." 4. Breathe. Let the breath move toward that area. 5. Add, "You were only trying to keep me safe." Then wait. You'll likely feel a wave, sometimes emotion, sometimes silence. That's the nervous system exhaling after years of being spoken to only through criticism. Apology here isn't weakness, it's recognition. It reestablishes internal trust. The body starts to believe that the mind is no longer its enemy. The alchemical model of emotional transmutation alchemy, in its original sense, was never about literal gold. It was about purification through relationship. Transforming one element by holding it in the presence of another. In emotional alchemy, shame is the lead, dense, heavy, dull. Tenderness is the fire, subtle, transformative, unwavering. When you bring warmth to what feels unworthy, you don't erase the shadow, you illuminate it. The shame molecule doesn't vanish, it changes structure. The same cortisol that once fueled withdrawal now metabolizes into oxytocin and serotonin under sustained compassion. This isn't poetic, it's biochemical. You are literally altering your internal chemistry by altering your tone. Tenderness is not naive. It's a transmutation in real time. It's the science of love made audible. When self-compassion feels impossible, for many people, tenderness feels threatening at first. The voice softens and suddenly, tears come. The body trembles, the chest feels too open. This is not regression, it's release. It's the dorsal freeze melting. The nervous system that spent decades in contraction experiences openness as danger because it's unfamiliar. It expects punishment to follow vulnerability. So when you first practice self-compassion, you might feel resistance, cynicism, or even nausea. That's just the old neural network recalibrating. Tenderness is the new tone your body has to learn to tolerate. The key is pacing. You don't flood yourself with love, you drip feed it. One kind sentence at a time, one deep exhale between thoughts, one moment of choosing gentleness over judgment. That's how biology learns safety again, incrementally, rhythmically, relationally. The mirror neuron dimension tenderness also operates through the mirror neuron system, the network that allows us to empathize with others by simulating their emotional state internally. When you speak kindly to yourself, you activate these same circuits. Your own nervous system becomes both the giver and receiver of empathy. It's self-regulation through internal resonance. This is where NSL and MLH converge. Language becomes a mirror, and tone becomes the signal of safety reflected to the self. It's not affirmation, it's attunement. You're not trying to convince yourself you're worthy. You're showing yourself what worthiness sounds like. Tenderness, as a social force tenderness, doesn't stop at the self. When you begin to inhabit it, your tone changes outwardly. Conversations shift, conflict de-escalates. People start to breathe easier around you. Why? Because your nervous system is now broadcasting a frequency of coherence. This is the ripple effect of compassion, what polyvagal theory calls co-regulation. The same ventral tone that soothes you internally becomes the one that soothes others externally. You become, quite literally, a source of safety in a world addicted to urgency. This is the secret power of soft people. They don't dominate rooms, they stabilize them. From deserving to allowing, one of shame's most enduring myths is the idea that we must deserve tenderness before receiving it. We imagine self-compassion as a reward at the end of healing, not the path itself. But tenderness isn't earned, it's remembered. When you stop trying to earn worthiness, something profound happens. The nervous system ceases its endless negotiation for peace. You no longer barter with yourself through self-improvement or punishment. You simply allow being. This is what philosopher Alan Watts meant when he said, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." Tenderness is that stillness, not passivity, but permission. It lets the sediment of self-hate settle so clarity can reappear. The neuroscience of enough. There's a measurable neural pattern that corresponds to the experience of sufficiency, the state of enoughness. It involves the default mode network, DMN, which is active during self-referential thought. In chronically self-critical people, the DMN shows hyperactivity, especially in the medial prefrontal cortex, an area tied to rumination. When people practice compassion meditation or tender self-talk, studies showed decreased DMN activation and increased connectivity with the insula, meaning awareness shifts from self-evaluation to felt presence. Translated into everyday language, tenderness quiets the narrator and lets the body speak. It brings you home from analysis into aliveness. Practical integration, the language of soft repair. Here's a way to integrate tenderness linguistically into daily life. 1. Start with breath. Before speaking to yourself, exhale. The voice that emerges on an exhale carries less force, more flow. 2. Use the present tense. I'm learning instead of I'll try. The present is where safety lives. 3. Reduce conditional phrasing. Replace if I do better, I'll rest with I can rest while learning. 4. Use endearment internally. Address yourself as you would a friend or child. Hey love, it's okay sweetheart. It may feel awkward, that's your shame resistance. Keep going. 5. Anchor in tone, say each phrase aloud. Notice the vibration. If your body tenses, slow down until warmth returns. Tenderness is learned through sound, not concept. It's the voice becoming its own medicine. Reflection practice. The tender mirror, find a mirror, or simply place your hand over your heart. Look softly at your reflection, not to evaluate, but to meet. Say aloud, I don't need to earn the right to be kind to myself. Pause, then whisper, I forgive the voice and tone I inherited. I release the voice that taught me I had to be good to be loved. I can be real and still be safe. Notice what happens. If tears come, that's not regression, it's integration. Your nervous system is remembering what safety sounds like. Why tenderness lasts longer than motivation. Motivation runs on adrenaline. Tenderness runs on oxytocin. Adrenaline gets you moving, but burns out fast. Oxytocin sustains engagement because it's relational. It reminds your body that effort is safe within connection. That's why tenderness creates consistent change. When the nervous system feels safe, the prefrontal cortex stays online, and real behavioral transformation becomes possible. The inner critic motivates through fear of collapse. The tender self guides through trust in repair. That's the alchemical shift, from control to connection, from striving to soft persistence, from survival to sovereignty. Insight prompt: ask yourself, what does tenderness sound like when I stop trying to deserve it first? Then listen, not for an answer, but for a tone. It might arrive as silence, or as a sigh, or as a small voice saying, finally. That's your parasympathetic system reopening. That's healing arriving not as an event, but as a frequency. Tenderness, as we've seen, isn't the end of the journey, it's the turning point. It's where awareness stops living in the head and starts living in the body. But awareness alone doesn't rewire the nervous system. Repetition in safety does. So once the chemistry of shame begins to soften, a new question arises. How do we sustain tenderness when the voice of survival still whispers? Because even after compassion enters the room, the nervous system still carries the memory of sharp tones, withheld warmth, and words that felt like weapons. The body remembers not just what was said, but how it was said. That's where the real work begins, the practice of tone as medicine, of speaking not just to describe the self, but to retune it, to make the voice itself the site of healing. You see, tenderness without embodiment risks becoming a concept, a gentle theory, but tenderness translated into tone becomes coherence. It's how the body finally believes what the mind has learned, and that's what our final element explores, how to transform insight into vibration, reflection into resonance, how to make every syllable a nervous system handshake, every word an act of repair. Let's step now into element 5, integration practice and closing whisper, the healing tone, where language slows down enough for love to sound like truth. By now, the voice of shame has shifted shape. It no longer storms in as loudly as it used to. It lingers more quietly, an ache, a hesitation, a remembered breath before you speak. That's the moment healing becomes real, not when the voice disappears, but when it stops deciding who you are. When you can hear it, meet it, and choose tenderness instead of tension. This final element is where awareness becomes embodiment, where tone becomes the bridge between memory and meaning. We're not analyzing anymore, we're listening. The nervous system learns through sound. The nervous system doesn't learn safety from logic, it learns it from tone. Every syllable you speak to yourself carries a frequency that tells your body whether you are safe to exist. When the tone is harsh, the vagus nerve contracts, the diaphragm tightens, and your system enters defense. When the tone softens, the parasympathetic branch activates, breath deepens, and the body remembers connection. That's why this final practice is called the healing tone. Because transformation doesn't happen through clever words, it happens through resonance. Your body doesn't want apologies, it wants attunement. It wants to hear that you no longer mistake vigilance for virtue. It wants to be spoken to like someone who belongs here. NSL sequence. Listen, locate, loosen, love will begin with the full NSL self-regulation sequence applied to internal dialogue. It's a simple framework for repatterning the voice in real time. 1. Listen, the tone audit. Before you respond to an inner thought, stop and listen to its tone. Don't analyze the content, notice the texture. Is it clipped or slow? Is it heavy, sarcastic, cold, weary? Every tone holds data about your nervous system state. If it sounds rushed, your system is sympathetic, fight, flight. If it sounds flat, you're in dorsal, freeze. If it sounds steady, open, or curious, you're ventral, safety. This awareness is your first language of healing. You can't change what you won't listen to. 2. Locate the resonance center. Ask yourself, where in my body is this voice speaking from? Maybe your chest tightens when you think I shouldn't have done that. Maybe your jaw aches when you whisper I'll never be enough. The body doesn't lie. It localizes every emotional tone. By locating the sensation, you give the voice somewhere to land. It no longer floats as an abstraction. It becomes embodied. 3. Loosen the breath between words. Now soften the area you've located. Take one slow exhale through the mouth if you can, and imagine releasing the grip around the phrase. The goal isn't to get rid of the voice. It's to loosen the physiology that carries it. Shame cannot survive sustained curiosity. It thrives on tension. Tenderness dissolves it. This is the somatic equivalent of unclenching a fist around an old belief. Or love, the new tone of belonging. Finally, speak to yourself aloud if possible in a tone that feels 1 degree softer than the last. Not forced sweetness, not performance, just 1 degree closer to warmth. This is the language of repair. Say something like, I can see my fear. I understand why I froze. You were trying to stay safe. Then pause. Let the tone echo inside you. Notice the body's microshift, a pulse of warmth, a sigh, a drop in heart rate. That's love at a biological level. The nervous system hearing that it no longer has to brace to belong. Mirror talk practice. Regulating through tone, the mirror talk practice isn't about affirmations or performance. It's about building tonal coherence, letting your spoken voice and inner voice finally agree. Stand or sit in front of a mirror. Meet your reflection softly, without evaluation. Speak slowly. Your task isn't to convince, it's to co-regulate. Try these sequences. I messed everything up adjusts to I made a mistake while trying to stay safe. Notice how the second phrase doesn't erase accountability. It restores compassion to context. I hate that I did that. Adjust to I can see my fear now, I don't need to hate it. Hatred collapses the system. Recognition releases it. What's wrong with me? Asks something in me is scared, I'll listen. Language that turns inward rather than against. Repeat them slowly. Your tone should fall, not rise. Let the vowels lengthen. Let the breath linger between sentences. You are teaching your body the rhythm of forgiveness. The voice is vessel of repair in NSL. We say every word has a body. When your tone changes, your biology follows. This is not a metaphor, it's measurable. Voice frequency is directly correlated with heart rate variability, a key indicator of emotional regulation. That means the way you speak determines how safe your body feels to feel. When we say the voice heals the wound that silence kept alive, we're describing the reactivation of coherence, the return of harmony between intention and expression. You are no longer punishing your nervous system with your own voice and thoughts. The return of softness after survival. For most people, survival required the suppression of softness. You couldn't afford to be tender. It made you vulnerable to ridicule, rejection, or control. But the paradox of healing is that the same tenderness once suppressed becomes the very force that rebuilds safety. To allow softness after survival is one of the bravest acts a human can perform. It signals to your entire being, the threat is over. Softness is not the absence of strength, it's the full return of choice. It's the right to meet the world without armor, and to know you can still protect yourself if needed. That is the quiet revolution of the healing tone. It redefines safety not as control but as connection. Daily practice. The voice journal every morning or evening. Record your inner tone. Not by writing thoughts, but by speaking them aloud into a recorder or just into the quiet air. Start with, here's what I need to say without punishment. Let the words come. Let the voice tremble if it must. Then, when you play it back, listen not to the story, but to the sound. Was your tone urgent? Cold? Apologetic? Then record again, this time slower, warmer, without justification. You'll start to hear two parallel selves, the surviving voice and the healing voice. With time they merge not by force, but by resonance. When shame returns, it will return, not as failure, but as familiarity. You'll hear the old tone resurface when you're tired, grieving, or unsure. When it does, whisper, you can be here. You don't have to protect me anymore. This simple sentence reprograms the nervous system. Instead of escalating into self-attack, you acknowledge the protector and bring it into regulation. Shame loses power when it's met as part of the system, not as the enemy of it. Reflection prompt, take a slow breath. Close your eyes. Ask yourself, what tone returns me to belonging with myself? Don't rush for meaning, wait for a sound. It might be a sigh, a hum, or a single word. That tone is your nervous system's signature of truth. When you find it, let it become your anchor. Speak from there whenever you can. Tenderness is the sound of a nervous system that remembers it's safe to stay. Whisper it once, then again slower. Let the vowels round, the consonants melt. Feel your breath settle in its rhythm. That's not affirmation, that's embodiment. You've become your own secure tone. The closing whisper, voice as vessel. In the quiet after reflection, sit with your hand over your throat. Feel the pulse beneath your fingertips, the vibration of life that has always been speaking, even when you couldn't. Say gently, I forgive my voice for learning fear. I trust my voice to find its truth. I no longer need to sound safe to be safe. Stay there for a few breaths. Let silence become sound again. That is the healing tone, the point where tenderness and truth become the same frequency. As this episode dissolves, listen closely to the quiet between sentences, that space where language ends and sensation begins, because not all communication happens in words. Sometimes the body speaks through tremors, breath, and stillness long before language catches up. In the next episode, episode 26, titled When Words Fail, Somatic Overwhelm and Speaking Through Body Cues, we'll explore how trauma, shutdown, and deep emotion communicate through physiology when speech disappears, and how to translate those silent signals into compassionate presence. Because sometimes the kindest voice you can offer is the one that doesn't need to speak at all. Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller,